I remember the day I died. Not the death that would one day come for me after centuries of war, but the first one, the death of the child I once was. The sky split open over Nocturne that day, bleeding light and metal. From the heart of a volcanic storm came a drop pod, a streak of burning iron tearing through the black clouds like the wrath of some forgotten god. I thought the world was ending. I was only 12 Terran years old, though on Nocturne, time meant nothing. The ground trembled beneath the eruption's roar, and I ran, barefoot over the charred rock, the heat licking my legs like hungry flame. When I stumbled upon the crash site, the pod lay half buried in molten glass, hissing steam into the air. I don't know why I reached out. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe fate, but when the hatch opened and a giant in emerald armor stepped out, the world I knew burned away. His eyes glowed red through the smoke. His skin was dark as obsidian. He looked down at me not with pity, but with recognition, as if he saw in me a spark worth saving from the fire. That was the day I ceased to be human. That was the day I was found by the Salamanders. They brought me to Mount Deathfire, to the fortress monastery where the air itself burned and the weak were turned to ash. There, I learned the first truth of our chapter. Fire does not only destroy, it purifies. Every child who came before the forge either emerged stronger or never emerged at all. When the apothecaries began their work, I thought I would die again. They dismantled me piece by piece, peeling away flesh and weakness, replacing it with engineered perfection. My lungs became filters of poison and ash. My bones were remade to bear the weight of armor heavier than stone. My blood was rewritten with the gene seed of Vulcan himself. I screamed until I forgot how. I forgot my name, my voice, my humanity. And when I looked at my reflection in the blade of a surgical instrument, I no longer saw a boy. I saw something born from fire and pain, a creature of metal and flesh, with red eyes staring back from skin black as volcanic glass. I was no longer human. I was a space marine. I was a salamander. They taught me the creed of Vulcan. To be strong is to protect. To endure is to serve. We were told that our bodies were weapons, but our purpose was mercy. We were not made to conquer, we were made to shield the innocent from a galaxy that had forgotten kindness. I believed it with everything I had left, but belief is easy in the safety of a fortress. True faith is forged only in battle. My first deployment came decades later, on a mining world called Corrigus II, a backwater planet of little value, home to billions who toiled for the Imperium without ever being seen. When the distress call came, they said it was rebellion. They were wrong. It was infestation. The gene-stealer taint had been festering for generations, twisting the ruling class into something almost human. When we made planetfall, the streets were silent, the air thick with the stench of fear. Captain Drouse led us, a warrior 3 centuries old, his armor scarred from a lifetime of battles. Before the drop, he looked at me and said, "Remember, brother TK, we are the Emperor's mercy as well as his wrath. Save those who can be saved." I didn't understand his words then. I thought mercy was weakness. We landed in the capital, a city carved into the mountainside, its steel veins running deep into the ore below. It was empty, no movement, no sound. Then came the noise, a wet, slithering whisper from beneath our feet. They came from the sewers first, bursting through grates in a flood of twisted bodies. They had once been miners, workers, children. Now they were mockeries of creation, their limbs stretched into grotesque forms, their faces frozen between man and monster. I raised my bolter and fired. The round struck the chest of a woman who still wore her administrator's uniform. The name tag pinned above her heart read, Livia. For years I told myself she was already dead, that the creature wearing her skin was something else. But even now, when sleep comes, I see her face. We fought for 18 hours straight. Flamers turned the streets into rivers of fire. The smell of burning flesh and promethium hung so heavy in the air, you could taste it. When my ammunition ran dry, I drew my chainsword and kept fighting until the blade's teeth were clogged with black blood. We were 18 salamanders against millions of infected. We should have called for exterminators, but Drouse refused. "We do not burn the innocent," he said, and so we fought on. For 8 days, we burned, bled, and buried our dead. We lost 5 brothers before we reached the survivors, 2 million souls hiding in the deep mining tunnels, terrified, untainted. When it was over, the Inquisition called it a success. They spoke of the Emperor's triumph. They didn't mention the 6 billion who died in the cleansing fire. They never do. That was the first time I understood what Captain Draus meant. Fire purifies, but it also scars. We salamanders remember both. Each flame we light leaves a mark, and each mark becomes part of who we are. The other chapters speak of glory. We speak of duty. We are not made for praise. We are made to endure. Years blurred into decades. Campaign after campaign, war after war. I learned that victory is often indistinguishable from tragedy. But sometimes, if we are lucky, there are moments that remind us why we fight. I remember one such moment on Valos the Ninth, a world of golden fields and clear skies, the kind of place that made you believe humanity still had something beautiful left to save. The orcs came like a storm, burning villages, slaughtering families. We arrived in time to make a difference. Our drop pods slammed into their lines, and we emerged in a wall of fire and thunder. Bolters roared, flamers hissed. The orcs welcomed death as eagerly as they brought it. To them, war was joy. To us, it was purpose. I faced their war boss myself, a hulking beast, 3 heads taller than me, its claw big enough to crush a tank. It tore off my helmet, ripping away flesh with it. I felt the blood run down my face, hot against my cold skin. Brother Pyriel fell beside me, his axe buried in the creature's shoulder. I grabbed the knife I had forged as a child, heating its blade until it glowed white, and drove it through the war boss's skull. It fell like a felled tree, shaking the ground. When the battle was over, the survivors emerged from hiding families, farmers, children. A boy approached me. He could not have been more than 10. His eyes were wide with awe. "Are you an angel?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm just a soldier." He studied me for a long moment, then asked quietly, "Does it hurt?" I looked at him, at the reflection of myself in his eyes, and answered the only truth that mattered. "Yes," I said. "It hurts every day." He nodded, as if he understood, and ran back to his family. I often wonder what became of that boy, whether he grew to live in peace, or if war eventually came for him, as it comes for us all. I've carried that memory through centuries of battle, through worlds that burned, through brothers who fell, through nights haunted by the faces of those I couldn't save. It hurts. It will always hurt. But that pain, that fragile, flickering ember of humanity is what makes us who we are. Other chapters glory in conquest, in obedience, in the cold precision of killing. We glory in compassion. We are salamanders, sons of Vulcan, forged in fire but bound by mercy. We remember every life we take and every one we save. We burn so that others may live. And that is the truth no one writes in the imperial records, the truth whispered only among the forges of Nocturne, that the greatest strength a warrior can possess is not his armor, his weapon, or his gene seed, it is his heart. Even when it breaks, even when it burns, it endures. I am Sergeant TK of the Salamanders, and this is how I learned that the fire which consumes us also keeps the light alive. The smell of Nocturne's ash never truly leaves you. Even after centuries among the stars, through battles fought on frozen moons and worlds drowned in poison seas, I still wake to it sometimes, the scent of smoke and molten earth, the memory of what it means to be forged. It was that memory that returned to me on Kyros III, the place where I learned that mercy burns hotter than any flame. Kyros III was an industrial hive world in the Segmentum Tempestus, its surface buried under towers of blackened steel and oceans of chemical sludge. The skies there were never clear. Acid rain fell like tears of the damned, carving rusted scars across the spires. It was a place that produced death for the Imperium chemical weapons, nerve agents, toxins for the wars that never ended. To the High Lords of Terror, it was valuable. To everyone else, it was hell. We were sent there to put down what the Administratum called a worker revolt. The official reports spoke of heresy and rebellion, of sedition against the Emperor's divine rule. but reports are written by those who fear truth. When our strike cruiser entered orbit, the first thing we saw was not rebellion, it was suffering. Whole districts burned beneath toxic clouds. The Vox channels screamed with civilian distress calls. Yet from the governor's palace came laughter and music. We made planetfall in that same palace, because that is how the Imperium does things, always starting from the top, never from the bottom. The governor greeted us himself. His name was Muthus, a man so swollen with gluttony that he wheezed when he spoke, his flesh gleaming with oils and gold. "Thank the Emperor you have arrived," he said, bowing as if the motion caused him pain. "The rebels have taken the lower hives. Production has dropped 30%. You must act swiftly, Captain Draus. The Emperor's armies require their munitions." Draus said nothing for a long moment. He simply looked at the man. I could read the tension in his jaw, the revulsion behind his crimson eyes. "We will restore order," he said at last. "Excellent," Malthus beamed. "I have prepared tactical maps. My advisors suggest a saturation bombardment of the lower hives, break their spirit early and the rest will follow. Efficient? Yes?" There was silence. Draus finally spoke, his voice low, steady, volcanic. "We will assess the situation ourselves. The Salamanders do not make war on civilians if it can be avoided." The governor's smile faltered. "Civilians? These are rebels, Captain. Heretics. Scum." "Nevertheless," Draus replied, "we will see with our own eyes." That night, while the governor feasted on imported delicacies, we descended into the hives. I led one of the infiltration squads. We moved through maintenance shafts, slick with chemicals, through tunnels filled with the smell of rust and blood. The deeper we went, the thicker the air became until it burned the lungs even through the filters. When we reached the lower levels, I saw the truth that reports would never record. These people were not rebels. They were workers, thin, sick, coughing blood into their hands. Entire blocks sealed off because of contamination. Families trapped behind walls, suffocating slowly so that production numbers wouldn't drop. The so-called rebellion had begun when a handful of Medici tried to treat the dying. For that crime, the governor had sent his enforcers. The workers had fought back, out of desperation, not treachery. I remember standing in a vast chamber that had once been a reclamation plant. It had been turned into a hospital of sorts. Hundreds of wounded lay on makeshift beds, their bodies covered in burns, their skin blistered from exposure to acid fumes. A woman moved among them, her left side horribly scarred, half her face melted away. But her eyes still burned with something unbroken. She whispered to the dying, comforted the living, commanded the others with quiet authority. I didn't know her name then, but I would never forget her face. When we returned to our command post, Draus listened to my report without interrupting. When I finished, he asked, "What would you recommend, Brother TK?" I hesitated. "We should negotiate," I said finally. "They do not seek to overthrow the Imperium. They seek only to live. If the governor were to implement safety measures, provide medical aid, and grant amnesty, they would return to work." Draus gave a small smile. "And if he refuses?" "Then remove him," I said. "For the good of the Imperium, a dead world produces nothing." Draus laughed softly. I had never heard him laugh before. "Well reasoned, brother. You speak as Vulcan would. Unfortunately, we lack the authority to depose a planetary governor, but perhaps there is another way." The next morning, he confronted Malthus. "We will end the rebellion," Draus said, "but on our terms. We will guarantee workers' safety reforms, medical aid, and amnesty. Production will resume once they are secure." The governor's face turned red with rage. "You overstep your authority, Captain. I will report you to the Inquisition." "You are free to do so," Draus said calmly. "In the meantime, we will proceed." We reached out to the rebels under a flag of truce. I was among those chosen to meet them. The woman with the burns stood at the front. "I am Vasha Kin," she said. "We did not seek war. We only want to live." Draus nodded. "And that is why we are here, to end this without more death." He explained our proposal. The room fell silent. These people had expected death, not compassion. Finally, Vasha asked, "Why? Why would you help us? We are nothing to you." "You are everything," Draus said. "Without citizens like you, the Imperium is nothing but empty cathedrals and dying stars." When she asked what would happen if the governor broke his promise after we left, I spoke before thinking. "Then we will not leave," I said. "I will remain on Kiros III with a detachment to ensure his compliance." It was not an order, it was a vow. Draus looked at me, and I saw approval in his eyes. "Brother Sergeant TK speaks with my authority," he said. And so we stayed. The war ended not with fire, but with words. The workers returned to their stations. The factories roared again. Slowly, reforms took shape, filters installed, treatment centers built, wages restored. I spent 3 years there, walking among those I had once been sent to kill. The governor hated every moment of it, but he obeyed. It is remarkable how moral a man becomes when a Space Marine watches over his every act. Vasha became our liaison. She never stopped wearing the scars that marked her defiance. Once, near the end of my posting, she brought me a small gift, a worker's medallion cast in bronze. "It belonged to my father," she said. "He died 2 days before the uprising. Keep it, so you remember why you fight." I tried to refuse. She pressed it into my palm. "You, salamanders, are said to be made of fire, but even fire must remember what it warms." I still carry that medallion. It hangs beneath my armor, next to my gene seed sigil, hidden but never forgotten. When I finally departed Kiros III, I looked down upon the planet from orbit. For the first time in centuries, its skies were beginning to clear. Not much, but enough to let the sunlight through. That was the only war in which I left more people alive than I found. They called it pacification in the records. They did not write about Vasha. They did not mention the millions who survived because one chapter refused to forget what it means to be human. But I remember. The salamanders always remember. We are forged in fire, yes, but we are not made of it. We carry the heat inside us, and with it, the pain, the guilt, the mercy. The fire purifies, but it never stops burning. It lives in the heart, constant and consuming. I have seen entire worlds burn in the name of the Emperor. I have seen angels of death descend in fire, leaving only ashes behind. Yet on Kiros III, amid the smog and poison, I witnessed something rarer than victory. I saw compassion triumph over fear. And that, I think, is what Vulcan intended when he made us. There are worlds in the Imperium that no longer exist, erased from every record, burned from every map. Kais Tertius is one of them. Its name has been scrubbed clean, its coordinates sealed under 100 layers of inquisitorial classification. But I remember because I was there, because I ordered the fire, because I heard the planet scream. It began, as so many tragedies do, with silence. Kais Tertius was an industrial world, a churning machine of smog and metal that built sentinel walkers and light vehicles for the Imperial Guard. Its skies were black with ash, its oceans dead, its people little more than extensions of the factories they served. There was nothing remarkable about it, nothing to distinguish it from 1,000 other worlds feeding the endless hunger of the Imperium, until the shipments stopped arriving. The first report came from a guard regiment stationed on Amon Reach. Crates of new sentinels arrived from Kais Tertius, except they were empty. When the containers were opened, there was nothing inside but scorched metal and ash. The tech priests called it sabotage. The administratum called it incompetence. We were sent to make an example. When our strike cruiser dropped from the warp above the planet, the first thing I noticed was the stillness. No defense grid challenge, no Vox traffic, no beacon codes, just static. Draus had died years before, on Helios Secundus, and I now wore his mantle. Command, a burden I never sought but could not refuse. We made planetfall near one of the major manufactoria complexes, a sprawling labyrinth of smokestacks and furnaces that stretched for kilometers. The air shimmered with heat and filth, but the machine still ran. That was the first sign that something was wrong. The workers were at their posts, their motions mechanical, precise, endless. They did not speak. They did not acknowledge us. When questioned, they gave the same answer in flat, lifeless tones. "We feed the hunger below." Over and over, "We feed the hunger below." At first, we thought it was some cult. Chaos, perhaps, but there were no marks, no mutations, no signs of possession, only emptiness. Their eyes were glassy, their skin pale, their veins pulsing with faint orange light, as if their blood had turned to molten metal. That night, I stood at the edge of a refinery platform and watched. The newly built Sentinels and Chimera tanks rolled from the assembly lines under their own power. They moved with eerie precision, forming long processions that snaked toward the horizon. No one commanded them, no one piloted them, they simply marched. At first, I thought it was a malfunction. Then I saw where they were going. The horizon glowed red, as if the world itself were bleeding. There, vast pits had been carved into the planet's crust, open wounds that reached into the mantle. The machines walked to the edges and climbed in, one after another, descending into the molten depths until they vanished. The ground trembled with each offering. The air itself seemed to breathe. Brother Hector, my second in command, argued that we should report immediately to the Mechanicus. This could be a new Xeno species, he said, his voice calm, almost reverent, or perhaps a warp entity feeding on industry itself. If we study it, we could understand it. I looked out across the factory plains at the endless lines of workers, the river of machines walking to their doom, the rhythmic pulse of the furnaces. They are already dead, I said. Whatever dwells here has taken them. He pressed me. Knowledge is power, Brother Sergeant. We cannot destroy what we do not comprehend. And how many more will it take while we study it? I asked. How many ships will come to investigate, only to join the silence? No, this must end now. The council was divided. Some feared that what lay beneath could not be destroyed. Others feared that it could. In the end, the choice was mine. The burden always is. I ordered a full-scale orbital bombardment. We returned to orbit, and I watched from the command dais as the first salvo struck. The Manufactoria erupted in plumes of white fire. The ground split, spewing molten rock into the sky. But beneath the chaos, something stirred. The augers lit up with seismic activity, tremors, pressure spikes, magnetic distortions that twisted the readouts into static. The planet was alive. Then came the voice, not through vox, not through sound, but through the mind itself, a whisper that became a wail, 1,000 languages speaking one truth, hunger. The deck shook. My vision blurred. I saw flashes, metal bending like flesh, machines writhing in agony, the ground pulsing like a heartbeat. Continue the bombardment, I ordered, though every instinct screamed to flee. The gunnery crews hesitated, their hands trembling, blood running from their noses. Fire, I shouted. The next barrage hit deeper, tearing through the crust. For a moment, there was silence. Then the world fractured. Magma exploded from the pits in vast geysers, painting the void with fire. A psychic scream tore through every soul aboard the ship. I felt it in my bones, in the gene seed burning within me. I fell to my knees as my armor's systems overloaded, the heat alarms shrieking. The scream was pain, rage, and something else. Recognition. Then it was gone. The seismic readings dropped, the tremors ceased. The planet fell silent once more. We remained in orbit for 3 weeks, scanning for any sign of movement. None came. The Mechanicus declared the planet geologically unstable and recommended destruction. The Inquisition agreed. Caius Tertius was bombarded until nothing remained but molten rock. The official report listed the cause as irrecoverable industrial collapse and civil unrest. But we knew better. We always know better. In the centuries since, I've wondered what it was that slept beneath that world. Some said it was a machine spirit, grown vast beyond control. Others whispered it was a god, the first of its kind, born not of chaos, but of industry and suffering. I do not know. I only know that it hungered, and that we fed it for too long. That was the first time I felt fear in battle, not fear of death. I have died 1,000 times in service to the Emperor. No, it was fear of how easy it had become to destroy, to give the order, to light the fire, to silence the screaming planet and call it mercy. When I close my eyes, I still hear the echo of that scream. Sometimes I think it wasn't anger I heard, it was grief. The Inquisition erased Caius Tertius from the records soon after. They do that with things that make them uncomfortable, but the Salamanders remember. We carry every fire within us, every soul consumed, every mistake turned to ash. We bear them as coals in our hearts, painful, heavy, eternal, because that is what it means to be human. That is what it means to be one of Vulcan's sons. Fire purifies, yes, but it also remembers. When I looked upon the void where the planet once burned, I realized something I had not dared to admit before, that perhaps the Emperor's light is not fire at all. Perhaps it is the shadow left behind after everything else has burned away. I prayed that day not for forgiveness, but for the strength to keep remembering, because once the memory is gone, we are no longer salamanders, we are just machines wearing flesh. And that, I swore, I would never become. There are wars that scar the body, and there are wars that scar the soul. The schism of Aaron V did both. It was supposed to be a small campaign, a cleansing operation on a feudal world caught in the grip of a religious dispute. The High Lords had labeled it a contained heresy. They were wrong. There is no such thing as a small heresy when faith itself catches fire. Aaron V had once been a world of beauty, lush green valleys, great stone cathedrals, cities carved into mountain faces. But when we arrived, it was already dying. Smoke rose from temple spires that had been bombed by their own worshippers. Villages burned under banners that all bore the same sigil, the Aquila of the Emperor, yet every faction claimed the other's version was blasphemy. It started, they said, with words, a doctrinal disagreement among the priesthoods of the ecclesiarchy. Two interpretations of the imperial creed, nearly identical save for one line whether the emperor's divinity was manifest through his flesh or through his will. A single sentence, twisted by pride and power, had divided a world. Now both sides called themselves true believers, both prayed as they slaughtered, both built pyres for the other's dead. We were sent not to judge, but to end it. When I set foot on the planet's surface, I felt the weight of futility settle on my shoulders. There was no Xenos here, no daemon, no tangible evil to destroy, only men killing each other over how best to love the same God. My orders were simple: restore imperial order, end the conflict, preserve the world's industrial output. It sounded clinical, efficient. It was anything but. We began with diplomacy. For weeks, I met with leaders from both sects, the High Deacon Solus of the Flesh Divine and the Grand Confessor Lathiel of the Will Ascendant. They were men of conviction, brilliant and blind in equal measure. Each could quote the same holy verses, yet twist their meanings into blades. I listened, I reasoned, I begged them to see sense. I reminded them that unity was the Emperor's truest commandment. They nodded, smiled, and returned to killing. It was during one of those meetings that I began to feel something I hadn't in centuries doubt. Not in the Emperor, never in him, but in the machine that bore his name. The Imperium demands obedience above understanding. It crushes questions like impurities in the forge. But I am a salamander, and we are taught that the fire's purpose is not to consume, but to reveal. What, then, was this war revealing about us? The answer came too soon. One night, a messenger arrived at our command post, a young acolyte drenched in blood, his eyes wide with horror. He carried a data slate from the cardinal of the local ecclesiarchy enclave. The message was simple and absolute. The High Lords have declared the Flesh Divine heretical. All loyal servants are to purge them. Immediate compliance demanded. Brother Harkin, one of my lieutenants, handed me the slate. Orders are clear, he said quietly. I stared at the words for a long time. Orders are always clear, I replied. It's the truth that never is. We struck at dawn. Our drop pods rained through clouds of smoke and ash, landing in the heart of Solus's stronghold, a cathedral fortress carved into the bones of a mountain. The stained glass shattered as our bolters thundered. The hymns of the Flesh Divine echoed against the roar of gunfire. They fought with desperation, chanting the Emperor's name even as they fell. I killed a man holding a relic in both hands. I burned a chapel filled with children who refused to flee because they believed death would bring them closer to him. By the end, the mountain was silent. The flames reached the sky. I stood among the ashes, my armor streaked with soot and blood. My brothers gathered the prisoners, the priests, the scribes, the faithful who had survived the purge. Among them was Solus himself. He was older than I expected. His eyes were tired, but calm, as though he had already made peace with what was coming. When I approached, he met my gaze without fear. "You know this is wrong," he said softly. His voice was barely a whisper beneath the crackle of burning stone. I didn't answer. "You know in your heart that we are faithful servants," he continued, "that we love him as you do. You see the truth, but you obey the lie. And that is why the Imperium will fall not to Xenos, nor to the warp, but to its own blindness. When good men follow bad orders without question, evil triumphs." He smiled then, not with defiance, but with sorrow. "I will not beg for my life, Sergeant. Only remember this moment. Remember that even angels can sin." I executed him myself. One clean shot, one less contradiction in the galaxy. But his words did not die. They took root, burning slow and deep, like embers buried in ash. When I returned to orbit, I filed the report. Schism contained, planet secure, heresy extinguished. Those were the words I wrote. The official record would call it a victory. The ecclesiarchy would build new cathedrals. Pilgrims would sing of the Emperor's justice, and the Salamanders would move on to the next war. But I could not move on. I could still see Solus's eyes in my mind, as clear as the boys on Valos IX, as bright as the glow of molten steel in the forge. He had been wrong about many things, perhaps, but not about that one truth that blind obedience is the slowest form of death. I spent that night alone in the chapel aboard our strike cruiser. There were no candles, no icons, only the hum of machinery and the faint hiss of recycled air. I stared at the flame of a single promethium burner and wondered if faith itself was like fire, beautiful, powerful, necessary, and yet so eager to consume everything it touched. We salamanders are told that our compassion is our strength, but compassion without wisdom can become cruelty wrapped in good intentions. On Aaron V, I learned that even mercy must be tempered, forged in reason. Fire without control burns everything, even the hand that holds it. When the next dawn came, I ordered the ship's engines to break orbit. As the planet shrank behind us, its surface glowing faintly with the heat of its new-made scars, I swore a silent vow. I would serve the Emperor still, but not the blindness that wears his face. I would obey, but only in ways that preserved what little humanity remains in this endless war. I would remember. Because the moment we stop questioning ourselves, the moment we stop feeling, we are no longer salamanders, we are no longer men, we are only weapons, hollow and burning. And I have seen enough of what blind weapons can do. War has a rhythm to it. Once you've fought long enough, you begin to feel it, the rise and fall of battle like the beating of a great, wounded heart, the drums of drop pods striking atmosphere, the pulse of bolters firing in unison, the whisper of prayers murmured through the vox as men die far from home. It's an endless rhythm, steady, familiar, and cold. But every so often, something breaks that rhythm, something small, something human. For me, that moment came on Tartarus Prime. It was a world already broken before we arrived, a forge planet of the Adeptus Mechanicus, dedicated to the production of plasma weaponry and macro-reactors. Entire continents had been turned into foundries. The air was thick with metallic dust that coated every surface like frost. When the corruption came, it spread through those same networks of industry, moving along data cables and conveyor belts, carried by the very machines that once served the Emperor. A cult of chaos had taken root among the tech priests, worshipping not the Omnissiah, but the promise of entropy. They called themselves the Choir of Iron. Their prayers were static, their hymns a distortion of binary and pain. By the time we made planetfall, half the forges had fallen to corruption. The other half still fought, their machine spirits screaming. The entire world was burning from within. I was commanding a strike force of 20 salamanders, then veterans all, scarred and silent. We dropped directly into the heart of the largest manufactorum, where reports said the cult's leader, A corrupted Magos Dominus had turned the central plasma core into a shrine. The heat was unbearable. Even through my armor, I could feel the air vibrate with energy. The enemy came at us from every direction, servitors twisted into abominations of flesh and steel, their voices nothing but feedback shrieks. The cultists moved in perfect synchronization, their bodies connected by cables, their eyes glowing with unholy light. We answered their blasphemy with fire. Promethium washed across the metal corridors, purging the corruption inch by inch. But chaos never dies quietly. Every step forward was another grave, dug in molten iron. We fought for 3 days without rest, 3 days of fire and screams. By the end, half my brothers were wounded, 3 were dead, but we had broken the cult. The Magos fell, his body burning in his own plasma shrine. His final words were static laughter, a noise that still echoes in my skull. Afterward, we moved through the ruins, ensuring nothing remained that could rise again. The Manufactorum was a labyrinth of broken machinery and half-melted corridors. I remember stepping through what had once been a living quarters for human workers. The walls were black with soot, the floors layered in ash. I was about to move on when I heard it, a faint sound, almost too small to be real, a whimper. I turned, scanning with thermal sensors, and there beneath a collapsed beam something moved. I tore the metal aside and found her. A child. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her hair was burned, her skin grey with ash. In her arms, she clutched a small stuffed animal, some crude approximation of a feline, its fur singed and its button eyes half melted. She didn't cry when she saw me. She just stared, wide-eyed, as if she'd been waiting for me all along. I remember kneeling slowly, carefully, trying to make myself smaller, though that was impossible. My armor must have looked monstrous to her, black and scorched, the salamander sigil etched in fire across my shoulder. I spoke softly, though my voice came out like thunder through the vox. "You're safe now." She blinked, then reached out and touched my gauntlet. Her tiny hand left a print of ash on the ceramite. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. For 3 days, I carried her through the war zone, through fire, through bombardments, through the ruins of a dying world. My brothers adjusted their formations around us without a word, taking greater risks to keep her safe. She slept against my chestplate as I fought, her head resting over the aquila carved into my armor. Every time I looked down, I felt the weight of her heartbeat against mine, a rhythm, small but defiant, a reminder of what all our wars were supposed to protect. We reached the evacuation site at dusk on the 3rd day. The sky was red with the light of orbital fire, but the transport ships were still coming. I handed her to the refugee coordinator, a weary man who looked at me as if I were a ghost. The child still held the stuffed animal in one hand. Then, just before she was carried aboard, she pressed it into my palm. A gift. A toy, half burned, its fur still warm from her touch. I wanted to give it back, to tell her she would need it more than I ever could, but she just looked at me and smiled, a small, fragile thing that somehow cut through the smoke and ruin like a beam of sunlight. Then she was gone. I stood there long after the transports had left, watching the sky until the last trace of light faded. The toy was still in my hand. I could feel its charred seams beneath my gauntlet. I didn't know her name. I never would. But I remember the warmth of her heartbeat through the armor, the way she had looked at me, not as a monster, not as an angel, but as something in between. When we returned to the strike cruiser, I placed the toy beside the medallion Vasha Kin had given me on Kiros III. 2 relics, side by side, a symbol of labor and a symbol of innocence. One from the heart of industry, the other from the heart of chaos. Both reminders of what we fight for. Even now, centuries later, I keep them with me. The Mechanicus would call it sentimentality, a flaw of organic imperfection. The Inquisition would call it weakness, an attachment unbecoming of an Astartes. But I call it memory. And memory is the only thing that separates us from the machines we build, from the monsters we fight, from the darkness we burn away. On Tartarus Prime, I learned that victory is not measured in enemies slain or worlds saved, It is measured in moments, small, fleeting sparks of humanity that survive in the midst of annihilation. One child, one heartbeat, one smile that refuses to die. That is why we salamanders fight. Not for glory, not for power, not for the Emperor's favor. We fight for the ones who can't, for the ones who will never know our names, for the chance that somewhere a little girl can sleep without fear, holding her stuffed animal under the light of a peaceful sky. That, I have come to believe, is what Vulcan meant when he said, "Fire forges all things." It's not just about strength, it's about compassion, tempered through suffering. The forge breaks us so that we may become the tools of mercy, and though the heat may consume us, we endure because someone must. When I close my eyes, I still see her, the child among the ashes, her small hand pressed to my armor, and I wonder if she remembers me, or if I have become just another ghost in the stories whispered to children when the storms rise. Either way, it doesn't matter. I remember her. That's enough. War defines us, but there are rare moments when we remember who we were meant to be. After Tartarus Prime, I did not expect mercy to find us again. I carried the child's toy with me, tucked beside the bronze medallion from Kiros III, and told myself that perhaps those two small relics were all that remained of my humanity. But then came Veritas IV, a world that reminded me, and all of us, that the fire of the salamanders was not only meant to burn, but to warm. Veritas IV was a forgotten jewel on the edge of the Imperium. It had fallen into technological regression centuries ago, abandoned by trade fleets and stripped of Mechanicus oversight. The people there lived simple lives, farmers, herders, hunters, unaware of the galaxy's eternal war. When the plague came, they had no weapons to fight it. They prayed instead, whispering to the stars for deliverance. And somehow, the Emperor answered. He sent us. We arrived expecting another battle, another cleansing by flame. Our orders spoke of biocontamination, of possible chaos taint. But when we descended through the planet's soft blue skies and saw the golden plains below, there were no armies waiting, no fortresses bristling with guns, only villages filled with the sick and dying. The air shimmered not with fire, but with heat rising from funeral pyres. The Inquisition representative accompanying us demanded immediate purgation. "Plague breeds heresy," he said. "Better a burned world than a corrupted one." I remember looking at him, this thin man in black robes, his face hidden behind a respirator, and thinking how easy it must be to destroy what you do not love. Draus would have refused him outright. I did the same. "No," I said, "we will not burn this world. We will save it." The Inquisitor hissed threats of censure, of heresy, of betrayal, but his words meant nothing. I turned away, and my brothers followed, because we are salamanders, and we remember the value of a single life. We began with the plague zones. I ordered our apothecaries to coordinate with the few remaining medicae. We constructed field hospitals from the ruins of burned-out temples, purged infection with controlled fire, sterilized wounds with promethium instead of destroying the bodies that bore them. The salamanders are not healers by nature, but we learn, we adapt. Fire can cauterize as well as consume. At first, the people feared us. To them, we were the angels of death they had heard of in myth, giants in black armor who descended only to judge. They knelt when we passed, trembling. Some even offered their children to us, thinking it would appease the Emperor's wrath. But when they saw us work, saw us lift the sick instead of killing them, saw us carry water instead of fire, they began to understand. Weeks passed. The plague was cruel and cunning, but not chaos-born. It spread through the livestock first, then through water supplies, killing slowly. Our apothecaries isolated the cause, a mutagenic spore native to the swamps that had been carried by trade winds into the villages. It could be stopped, it could be cured, and for once, our mission was not to destroy, but to protect. I remember walking through a settlement one night, the stars above sharp and endless. A small group of children followed behind me, laughing. They were unafraid now. One of them, a boy no older than 8, walked beside me, holding a wooden carving of a flame. "It's you," he said proudly, "the Black Angels. My mother says you came from the Emperor's fire to save us." I looked down at the little carving. Crude, imperfect, yet made with care. "We came because your lives matter," I told him. He nodded solemnly. "That's what the Emperor says too." For the first time in decades, I smiled. The campaign lasted nearly 6 months. Not one shot fired in anger, not one enemy slain. Every day was spent among the people, building, healing, burning only what needed to be purified. We taught them to sterilize their water, to cleanse their wounds, to use fire wisely. They began to call us the Black Angels of Mercy. They built shrines not of gold and marble, but of clay and wood, small statues of salamanders holding torches, their eyes carved to glow like coals. They sang songs to us. It made my brothers uneasy. "It feels wrong," Brother Hector said one night as we stood watching the villagers pray. "We are not gods." "No," I agreed, "but perhaps we remind them that gods can be kind." When the plague was finally gone, and the last of the sick had risen from their beds, the planetary governor held a ceremony. He was not a noble man, not a general or priest, just a farmer chosen by the people to speak for them. His hands were rough, his face lined by sun and grief. He approached me with a gift, a pendant carved from native wood, shaped into a stylized flame. "For you, Lord of Fire," he said, "so you will remember that your light reached us." I took it, but I did not wear it. Instead, I placed it beside the medallion and the child's toy in my armor's reliquary. Each of them represented something I could not explain: pain, hope, memory, 3 sparks of humanity that refused to go out. When we departed Veritas IV, the entire population gathered to watch our ships ascend. I looked down from the ramp of the Thunderhawk and saw them waving torches in the night, thousands of small fires flickering against the darkness. It looked like the stars themselves had come down to the surface to bless them. For a moment, I forgot the wars, the screams, the endless suffering. For a moment, the galaxy seemed worth saving. That was the only campaign in my life where I did not have to kill a single human being, not one. The reports called it the cleansing of Veritas IV. But we had not cleansed, we had healed, and for that, I was grateful. The fire, for once, had burned bright without devouring. I often think back to that planet, when the darkness grows too heavy. I think of the children with their wooden carvings, of the boy's solemn face as he said, "The Emperor's fire saves." I think of the torches glowing like constellations, the warmth that filled the air that night. We are taught that the galaxy knows only war, that peace is an illusion, that mercy is weakness. But on Veritas IV, for a brief, fleeting heartbeat of history, mercy was stronger than any weapon, and it changed me. When I left the planet, I carried more than relics. I carried proof that the Emperor's will is not only judgment, it is compassion, too. That even in a galaxy of iron and blood, a single act of kindness can still burn brighter than all the stars. I know the flame cannot last forever. I know the next world will likely demand blood again. But for that moment, we remembered who we were meant to be. Not angels of death, not soldiers of obedience, but guardians of light. And as long as one world, one village, one child still believes that the fire can heal, then the salamanders will endure. Because mercy, too, is a kind of fire, and it will never go out. There are worlds that cry for help, and there are worlds that whisper. Cais Tertius was one of the latter, a quiet place in the records of the Administratum, a factory world on the fringe of the Segmentum Solar, listed only for its steady output of sentinel walkers and light vehicles. No one paid it much mind until the shipments began to change. Crates meant to contain war machines arrived empty. Others held nothing but ash. When the Mechanicus demanded answers, the silence that followed was deafening. We were sent to investigate. I remember the first sight of the planet from orbit, a grey orb wrapped in veils of smoke. Its atmosphere was thick, its continents hidden beneath a shroud of pollution. It looked ordinary, even dull. But I have learned that evil rarely announces itself with grandeur. It waits in the quiet. Our scans showed the manufactorums still active, power readings consistent, worker movement steady, but there was something wrong, too steady, too perfect. Human labor never flows without chaos. The randomness of life is what makes us human, and on Cais Tertius there was none. We made planetfall in the industrial district. The air was heavy with ash. The sky hung low and orange, thick with the glow of 1,000 forges. The workers moved in long, endless lines, men and women with hollow eyes and slow, deliberate motions. They paid us no heed. Even when our thunderhawks shook the ground, they did not stop. They did not flinch. We tried to speak with them. No answer. Their mouths moved, but their words were wrong, like echoes of speech played backward. I ordered Brother Hector to scan for neural activity. Minimal, he said. They're alive, but barely. It's as if their minds have been hollowed out. As we moved deeper into the complex, the truth began to take shape. Every night, when the shift ended, the newly constructed sentinels and tanks did not go to storage, they walked. I saw it myself, the machines rising from their platforms like obedient beasts, marching in single file through the manufacturum gates. We followed them at a distance, moving through the fog of industry until we reached a massive fissure in the planet's crust. There, the machines descended into fire. It was not symbolic. They climbed willingly into the magma, one by one, melting in silent procession. The workers followed, their faces calm, their movements mechanical. There was no fear, no pain, only obedience. And somewhere below, deeper than our auspex could reach, something fed. We returned to base, the firelight still reflecting on our armor. Something ancient dwells beneath, Brother Malthus said, his voice grim. A warp entity perhaps, or worse. The debate that followed was fierce. Hector argued for study, Malthus for quarantine. The newer brothers looked to me. In their eyes, I saw the question they did not dare speak. Can this be saved? I looked out the viewport, at the endless lines of workers and machines, moving like veins in a living world, and I felt the answer burn in my chest. They are already dead, I said quietly. Whatever lives beneath has consumed them. But if we study it, Hector protested, we might understand it. We could. How many more will it take before we understand? I asked. How many ships? How many lives? Some knowledge is not meant for us. He fell silent. Even the youngest among us knew what that meant. The decision was mine. I gave the order. Prepare the bombardment. We returned to orbit and unleashed everything we had. Lance batteries carved through the manufactorums. The fire spread faster than I expected. Entire continents became oceans of flame. The workers did not flee. They walked into the fire, their bodies glowing like molten statues as the heat consumed them. Then the world screamed. Every soul aboard our ship felt it not through ears, but through mind. A psychic wail so vast it shook the marrow of our bones. It was agony and hunger and rage all at once. I fell to my knees as the ship's alarms blared. On the surface, the crust of Cais Tertius split open. Rivers of magma erupted, carrying with them shards of black stone, each one pulsing like a heart. Focus fire on these coordinates, I shouted. Our gunnery crews obeyed without hesitation. The final barrage struck true, and for a moment, everything was light. When the glare faded, half the planet was gone. The crust had collapsed into itself, sealing the abyss. The psychic noise ceased as suddenly as it began. Only silence remained. We watched for 3 weeks. No movement, no energy signatures. Whatever had lived below was either destroyed or sleeping again. The official record would call it an exterminatus extremis, due to irrecoverable industrial collapse. Cold, neat words for the death of billions. I still hear that scream when I dream. Sometimes, I wonder what it was that we destroyed. A daemon? A machine spirit gone mad? Or something older, something that fed on obedience and despair? It does not matter now. What matters is that Cais Tertius was beyond saving, and that truth burns deeper than any wound. When I close my eyes, I see the faces of the workers as they walked into the fire. Calm, empty, accepting. I wonder if they had chosen it, if in some way, surrendering to the flame was the last act of humanity they had left. Afterward, Brother Hector stopped speaking to me for nearly a year. He obeyed orders, fought by my side, but his silence was heavy. When he finally did speak, his voice was quiet. You were right, Sergeant, but I wish you hadn't been. So do I said. We do not take pleasure in our duty, not ever, but we do what must be done, because no one else will. That is the paradox of the salamanders. We carry the fire that saves and the fire that destroys. We are both mercy and judgment, compassion and flame, and sometimes they are the same thing. I keep a piece of Cais Tertius, still a shard of obsidian from the planet's surface, black as night, warm to the touch no matter the cold. I do not know if it's cursed or simply a reminder, but when I hold it, I remember the weight of that decision, the sound of a world dying so that others might live. That is what it means to be forged in fire, to burn and keep burning until nothing human remains, and still to fight for humanity all the same. I have served the Emperor for 276 Terran years. I have walked through storms of ash and oceans of blood. I have seen worlds born and worlds die. I have watched brothers rise from the forge as heroes and fall into the fire as martyrs. And now, as I look back across the centuries of war that have shaped me, I understand that my life has never truly been my own. It was given to the flame the moment I said yes. There is a sculpture that stands in the great hall of our fortress monastery on Nocturne. It depicts our primarch, Vulcan, not as a conqueror or god, but as a guardian. His massive form kneels in the soot and ruin of battle, one arm cradling a child no bigger than his hand. His expression is not rage or triumph, but compassion, a softness rare among demigods. His eyes, carved from onyx and firestone, seem to look directly at you, as if to ask a single question: are you willing to burn so that others may live? When I was a boy, they brought me to stand before that statue. My skin still blistered from the trial of fire, my body weak, trembling. I didn't understand what the question meant then. I only knew that the fire had taken everything I was, and I had nothing left to lose, so I said yes. I understand now. To burn is to suffer. To burn is to change. Fire destroys, yes, but it also purifies. It consumes weakness, burns away fear, reveals the strength that lies hidden beneath. Every salamander learns this truth. But we also learn something rarer, that the fire's purpose is not to consume others, but to consume ourselves, to spend our strength, our lives, our humanity, so that others may be spared. That is what makes us different from our brothers in other chapters. The Ultramarines have their codex to guide them. Their certainty is their armor. The Space Wolves have their songs and sagas. Glory gives their pain meaning. The Imperial Fists have their stoicism. They bury their emotions beneath stone. But we carry every death, every scream, every face we could not save. We do not forget. We cannot forget, because forgetting would mean losing the very thing that makes us human. I still remember every brother I've buried. Draus, who taught me that mercy is not weakness. Cais, who died blocking a tunnel so that others could live. Hector, who stood beside me even when he disagreed. Piriel, who smiled through blood and said, "Then it was worth it. They are the coals that burn within me still, the forge that never cools." I remember every civilian I've failed to save. The woman with the name tag Livia on Corrigus 2, the miners buried alive in molten tunnels, the millions on Cais Tertius who walked willingly into fire. Their faces come to me in dreams, and I let them, because memory is the price of compassion. And I remember those who lived, the child on Tartarus Prime, with her scorched toy pressed into my hand, the workers of Kiros III, who rebuilt their world with blistered hands and hope, the farmers of Veritas IV, lighting their torches like stars beneath the night. Their lives are my reward. Their survival is the only glory that matters. There is an old legend told among our people on Nocturne, a tale of the first salamander. It speaks of a great fire lizard that lived in the heart of Mount Deathfire. When a human child fell into the volcano, the salamander dove into the flames and wrapped its body around the child, shielding it from the heat. The creature survived, but it was forever changed. Its bright scales turned black. Its eyes glowed red with the fire it had absorbed. It could never return to its kin, never rest again in the cool earth. But it had saved the child, and in that act of self-destruction, it found purpose beyond instinct. We are like that creature, burned, changed, exiled from the humanity we protect. We can no longer live among those we save. Our skin is obsidian, our eyes are flame, our hearts filled with the echoes of too many deaths, but we endure because someone must. When recruits come to us now, young men trembling before the forge, their flesh unscarred, their minds still dreaming of glory, they are brought to stand before Vulcan's statue. The same question is asked: are you willing to burn so that others may live? Some answer quickly, proud and eager. Others hesitate, sensing the truth that hides behind the words. But in time, all who become salamanders give the same answer: yes. Because to serve the Emperor is to accept death 1,000 times over, not just in battle, but in the quiet moments between, when the weight of survival crushes the soul. We die a little with every order we give, every decision that condemns some to save others. But we accept that burden, because our fire does not burn for ourselves, it burns for humanity. That is the true meaning of glory, not the songs sung by imperial choirs, not the medals cast in gold, not the statues raised by those who never fought. Glory is the life that continues because we chose to burn. Glory is the child who grows up without ever seeing war. Glory is the peace that others mistake for the Emperor's blessing, not knowing it was purchased in blood and ash. I have died 1,000 deaths in service to him. Each brother lost, each civilian I could not save, each world left burning in our wake. Small deaths, necessary deaths, but I have also lived 1,000 lives. Each child rescued from the rubble, each world healed instead of destroyed, each act of mercy carried out in defiance of despair. That is the paradox of our existence. We are weapons forged to kill, yet we fight so that others may live. We are monsters in form, yet we strive to remain human in spirit. We are the salamanders, sons of Vulcan, keepers of the fire, guardians of the fragile and the weak. And though the galaxy burns around us, though chaos rises and empires fall, though even the stars themselves fade into ash, we will stand, we will burn, we will endure. For the Emperor, for humanity, for the child who will never know our names. That is the fire that remains,